Good morning.
Good morning.
Boker Tov.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Good to be back. Hope you all had a good day, having a good morning. This is our final shiur before Kabbalat Torah and Chag HaShavuot. So here we go. We're in Masechet Makkot Daf Kaf Amud Bet, and this is just an example again of how the Torah. We know that the Torah is all integrated. It's all one. It's all one thing. Everything is connected from one place to another. We started off, we're learning Masechet Makkot, dealing with Harei Miklat. The last thing we were talking about was the dinim of Lo Yikrachu Korcha. Lo Yikrachu Korcha. In other words, the prohibition of pulling out one's hairs as a sign of excessive mourning, excessive grief. In fact, the Gemara talks about two different isurim. It talks about the idea of removing one's hair as a sign of excessive grief, and it talks about causing a wound in one's flesh, right? That's a lo yikrachu korcha v'lo yisrotu saretet. We're going to see some similarities between those two halachot. There were also another two dinim which were mentioned in our Mishnah, which was regarding pe'at harosh and pe'at hazakan, in terms of shaving with a blade, shaving one's hair, the corners of one's hair, the corners of one's beard as well. So we go from there. The Gemara sort of tangentially mentions Neged Sarat as well, and now we're going to go into Hilchot Shabbat. So everything is connected one to the other. The last thing we discussed, the Gemara spoke about the question of karcha. What is the shiur of the karcha, right? What is the minimum size? And again, for which one gets Makkot. Throughout these sugyas, we've seen it before, we'll see it now again. The idea of many times the Gemara asks a question, we have to differentiate between whether we mean for there to be a prohibition or for there to be Makkot. We'll see, it's going to come up again soon. So when the Gemara, right, those are two different things. Those are not necessarily related one to the other. So when it asks about the punishment, that's clear. When the Gemara asks about a chiyuv, we're talking about a chiyuv for Makkot. It doesn't mean that less than that is still not going to be an isur, not going to be a prohibition. So when the Gemara talks about the shiur, ad kama v'yeh chayav, in other words, what is going to be the minimum shiur and which one is going to be chayav for Makkot? So we saw three different opinions in the Tanaim, three different opinions regarding the question of where it comes to lo kachu karcha. Was it kadei she'ara'eh merosho? In other words, you remove enough hair so that your head is then exposed, or was it the size of a grist, or was it enough just that it's going to be two se'arot, there's going to be two hairs, right? That was where we left off. Those were the different opinions on the in the Tanaim. So if we go about a third of the way down, about a third of the way down, the Gemara now says, based on that, we go into a bit of a tangential discussion relating to hairs, on Shabbat. So the Gemara says, Tana. You see the line towards the end of the line. It says, Tana hanotel melopi azug. So we have a braita that says, hanotel melopi hazug b'Shabbat chayav. If somebody is going to take off the amount of hair that is melopi hazug, so it says here the rivan, it says piazug, a few lines down from on the Gemara, right? It says chudan shel misparayim. In other words, the blade of the scissors. So the amount of hair that's going to fill up, so the blade, the tip of the blade of the scissors, that amount one takes off on Shabbat. For that one is going to be chayav. Okay. The kama melopi azug. How much is that? So Rav Yehuda shtayim. Rav Yehuda says that is going to be shtayim. That is going to be two hairs. So that is the minimum shiur. In the Gemara on Shabbat, it goes through for a number of different. We have a number of different melachot where it goes through. It talks about the shiur. It talks about regarding carrying. It talks about regarding many different halachot. For example, writing. Right? What is the minimum amount that one writes for which one would be chayav on Shabbat? So the Gemara there says 2 letters, right? Or if you were to erase 2 letters. What happens, however, if you write less than that, but it forms that you write one letter, but that completes a word, or you erase 1 letter and that forms a word. So that would be something else as well. But generally speaking, we have the minimum measure, minimum amount, the minimum shiur, which one would then be chayav. As we know, and we've mentioned in this shiur as well many times, chatzi shiur asur min Torah. That's the machloka between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish in the Gemara Yoma, the last Perek, that we pass like Rabbi Yochanan, where we say chatzi shiur asur min Torah. So even if it's less than the measure of which one would be liable for the punishment, it would still be forbidden. But in terms of the punishments, in terms of the chiyuv, that is how much. So we say here that if one was to remove 2 hairs, what is the prohibition? What is the melacha? This would be the melacha of gozez. Melacha of gozez, which was done in the Mishkan in terms of shearing the sheep and shearing the wool that was used for the materials. But any time, so when a person would cut their hair or cut their nails, right, taking that off that material basically of a living being, that would be gozez, that would be sharing, and that would be forbidden. So says the Gemara, if one is to take those hairs which fill up the tips of the scissors, how much would that be? That would be 2 hairs. That would be forbidden. Again, we come on to that because we're talking about the minimum measurement of hairs regarding karcha, and therefore we go into Hilchot Shabbat. So Vatanya now asks the Gemara questions. Wait a minute. La korcha shtayim. In other words, we have the Braita tells us that on the one hand we have a measurement of 2. By korcha, we saw different ideas, right? Different measurements. One of them said 2 hairs. Here by Shabbat it tells us melopi azug, which is a different definition. If you're telling me that melopi azug means 2 hairs, then how come in one place it says melopi azug, in another place it says 2? Sounds like these are 2 different ways of phrasing, 2 different measurements. So it says the Gemara, no, we have to read the Braita saying, and also for korcha shtayim, meaning that is also the same as the measurement of melopi azug, that is 2. We have another Braita which teaches us a similar idea. הנוטר מלוא פי הזוג בשבת חייב, וכמה מלוא פי הזוג? 2. Okay, again, the same thing, that somebody who takes off the hairs that is the amount of the tips of the scissors, that would be chayav. On Shabbat, how much is that? That is 2. So that is one opinion. Rabbi Eliezer me'achat. Okay, so we actually have a machloket. Rabbi Eliezer says, even if you cut off one hair, that is still going to be forbidden. It is still going to be forbidden. Umodim chachamim Rabbi Eliezer b'melaked levanot mitoch shcholot afilu achat shu chayav. And however, chachamim agree with Rabbi Eliezer. Chachamim say 2 hairs. Rabbi Eliezer says 1, but Chachamim agree in the following case, which is melaket levanot mitoch shchorot. If a person takes out the white hairs, is removing white hairs from amongst the black hairs, right? White hairs or gray hairs, the person wants to look maybe they want to look a bit younger, so they're taking the white hairs away specifically. Even if it's just 1, for that you would be chayav. Why? Because that is significant. There, a person wants to beautify their face or their hair, whatever it is. And even though they're only taking away 1, in that case, that is significant. Like the example I mentioned before, when it comes to writing or erasing, even if it's less than the minimum amount of 2 letters, but it's causing something significant. It's creating a word, etc. And we have this by other malachot as well. The point is, we need a minimum shiur for it to be significant. If there's another way in which it causes that shows it's an important action, that would be chayav as well. So continues the writer, v'davar zeh afilu b'chol asur, to take the white hairs away from the black hairs. That even if it's not Shabbat, even if it's on a weekday, that's going to be forbidden. Why? Obviously, not forbidden because of gozez, but it's forbidden. Why? Mishum shnema lo yilbash gever simlat isha. So this is the issue of lo yilbash. We have a pasuk that tells us that a man should not wear a woman's clothing, and so too vice versa. That is, and that is not just regarding clothing, but that is regarding any sort of cosmetic action which is done, which is specific, which is gender specific. Right? Well, what only would be the practice of women to do, then men cannot do that as well. So the Rivan over here says, "Af b'chol asur shemitna'eh atzmo." He's beautifying himself in a way that is only that women do. So putting on makeup or something like that would seem to be the same. So the Shulchan Aruch over here, he brings this halacha. He says, this is the Shulchan Aruch in Yoreh De'ah, Siman Kuf Pei Bet. I'll put it up on screen for you. It's a short, then we'll look at something fascinating in the Chashukei Chemed. So the Shulchan Aruch says, quotes our Gemara, he says, "Asur le'ish lelaket afilu se'ar achad lavan mitoch hashcholot." It's forbidden for a man to take even 1 white hair away from the black hairs. Mishum lo yilbash gever. This is part of the prohibition of of wearing women's clothing or of acting in such a way. V'chein asur le'ish litzboa se'arot levanot sheyu shcholot afilu se'ar achad. So too, not to dye the hair in such a way. And v'chein asur le'ish listakel b'marah. Says the Shulchan Aruch, and so too, a man cannot look in the mirror. So clearly things have changed, right? Nowadays, we know that nowadays there is no prohibition for a man to look in a mirror. But once upon a time, it was only the way that women would do that in terms of beautifying themselves. And therefore, that would be forbidden. So what we see from here, what the poskim point out, is that when it comes to this prohibition, this issue of lo yilbash, there are certain things which are going to be objective, right? Certain elements of clothing, etc., which are by definition women's clothing or men's clothing, would be forbidden for the other gender to wear. And then there are going to be things which are societally, contextually, which can change. So a great example is what the Shulchan Aruch mentions here, looking at a mirror, which nowadays is very, very commonplace. In those days it wasn't, and therefore that would change. By the way, this is, I think we mentioned once, in Sefer Breshit, when there's the whole story of Yosef and Potiphar and Potiphar's wife, and the Gemara in Sotah tells us that and Afyomi, this was not so long ago, those of you that are following that, but it says that appeared to Yosef Dmut Yukno Shel Aviv, right? How did Yosef gather the strength not to sin in that way, to resist that temptation? Because he saw an image of his father. He saw Dmut Yukno Shel Aviv, Derech HaChalon. He saw the image of his father through the window. We've discussed in the past why the window, but in any event, and he thought to himself, he imagined, right, what his father would say and how there would be part of the change of generations, etc. So the Mefarshim who say Don't remember exactly. I don't remember who says that, but there is such an idea that maybe that it says when he saw through the window that he saw the Dmut Yukno Shel Aviv, actually Yosef saw his reflection. And we know that he looked just like his father, and he saw his father's face, i.e., he saw his face in the mirror, and he saw his father's face. In those days, people never really looked at a mirror. He'd never necessarily seen himself, so he didn't know. In any case, you see, that was now that it's much more commonplace, it's different, but in those days, that's not something people really did. So the Chashukei Chemed, which we look at sometimes, Rav Zilberstein, who has shutim related to the topics on the daf, has some very, very interesting questions here relating to this issue of lo yilbash. So he says the following. He says, question's fascinating. He says, if you have a soldier who needs to dress up as a woman, this actually happened recently. You might have seen the videos, one of the operations that Tzahal did. I don't remember if it was in, I think if it was in Shechem or Jenin, where they went in. Part of it was that they were dressed up as women to go inside in disguise and then perform the operation they needed to. So the question he asks, is the following. He says, you have military personnel who need to dress up, they need to put on makeup in order to appear as women. This is mitam pikuach nefesh. So that in itself is not a question. Of course, that's permitted. It's for saving lives. They can transgress this prohibition of lo yilbash. Just like all Isurei Torah are set aside for pikuach nefesh. יש להסתפק. מה הדין כאשר איש צבא יודע שיהיה חייב להיות מאופר כאישה ביום שבת קודש? So he says, what if the operation is going to be on Shabbat? The person needs to put on makeup on Shabbat. ויש לו אפשרות לטפל בערב Shabbat, and he can put on the makeup on Erev Shabbat. Again, I'm not now getting into the sugya of makeup in terms of if it's permanent, if it's temporary, in what ways. There are certain ways which is permitted on Shabbat, certain ways where it's more problematic. But he says, assuming this is something which should not be done on Shabbat. So would it be better, therefore, for him to put up their makeup in advance, before Shabbat, right, to prevent the Chilul Shabbat? Or should he wait until the time of the operation, let's say Shabbat in the morning? In other words, he's asking, he can transgress the lo yilbash for the time of the operation when he has to. But if he's going to do it earlier, right, a few hours before it's necessary, in order to avoid Chilul Shabbat, but he's therefore extending the prohibition of lo yilbash. And the answer, he says, is going to depend on what is the Yisur of lo yilbash. You know, we can ask this by many mitzvot and by many averot. Is the Torah trying to prevent us from the action, or is it trying to prevent us from the outcome? And that's going to be the difference. So he quotes here the Igrot Moshe of Moshe Feinstein, who says, it is not the act of beautifying oneself in the way that a woman does. Rather, it is the outcome. That a person looks like a woman. And therefore, if it's the outcome which is prohibited, so we should prevent that. And therefore, he says that you should wait until you have to. In other words, the conclusion that he therefore comes to is this. He says, he needs to dress up on Shabbat morning. So he should only do it at the time when it is required, and not before. Then on Shabbat and not before. Okay, he quotes a Biur Halacha, which talks about people in the army doing where they are required to do a melacha d'oraita if it's on Shabbat, or they should do it before Bein Hashmashot. Again, fascinating discussions in Biur Halacha. Thankfully nowadays, right, these are not the kind of questions we have, because our army is a Jewish army and things are done al pi halacha. He has a few other questions. Yeah, again, Rav Zilberstein, he has another question, which basically hinges on the same chakira. He talks about somebody who is a ger shemitgayer, and he rotzel etzboa serotav she'elubinu. So he says, the Gemara said, you can't paint your Shulchan Aruch said you can't dye your white hairs. So he says, what if he has white hairs and he wants to dye them before he converts? And then after his Giyur, are we going to say now that the Isur was just the action which he took, or was it the outcome? And if it's the outcome, then he would still have to go and dye his hair back. Okay, so he goes back and forth. He also has questions here about doctors in terms of Lo Yobash. The other place, by the way, where this comes up, this question occasionally comes up, is on Purim. And there's always somebody who wants to ask the question: can a man dress up as a woman? Or can a woman dress up as a man? Again, the poskim generally are not so enthusiastic about it. But if it's done there as part of a costume, there are many who say that it's that it would be that it would not transgress this prohibition. Okay, so back into the Gemara. So the Gemara said, we said Rabbi Eliezer v'Menaket levanot mitoch sholot, that we said Chachamim said 2 hairs, Rabbi Eliezer said 1 hair. Chachamim agree with Rabbi Eliezer that if you are taking the white hairs out of the way from the black hairs, that even with one would be chayav, but that would be forbidden even on a weekday, not on Shabbat. Mishum shneimar lo yabash gever simlat isha, as part of this prohibition of lo yabash. Okay. Next, we go back to the sugya of peot harosh or peot hazakan. So the Mishnah said, "Makif peot rosho," etc. Just going back, just looking at the line, the full quote from the Mishnah. We said, "Makif peot rosho v'amashchit peot zkano." Right. So it said, "Makif" means sort of to circle, "mashchit" means to destroy. Regarding the edges of the hair and the edges of the corner of the peot. So says the Gemara, Tan Rabbanan, peot rosho. Sof rosho. What does peat rosho mean? The corner of the hair means the edge of the hair. The ezo sof rosho, and what is the edge of the end of the head? Okay, the Gemara is going to give us a definition. Of course, there are going to be great discussions in the Rishonim precisely what it is and precisely how we measure this. But the general principle is in other words, one who mashvet sta'av, sort of the sides. If you mashveh means kind of to make it equal. So if you were to take a line to go all the way around the sides of one's head to go the circumference, basically behind one's ears and one's forehead, the top of one's head as well. So if you were to take a circle to go right from the head all the way to the back around one's ears, so there all the hair which is underneath, that is where the payers are. That is the area of which one is not allowed to cut, which one is not allowed to shave. Tani Tana Kamei de Rav Chisda, Echad HaMakif ve'Echad HaNikaf Loker. Okay, so this is interesting. Says we have a bride which was taught in front of Rav Chisda that the one who is makif, in other words, the one who is shaving the head, ve'Echad HaNikaf, but also the one who is being shaved, who's having their hair taken off, lucky, but both of them are going to get Makkot. Both the one who is active and the one who is passive. The Gemara immediately is going to ask the question, I don't understand. If you're passive, why are you getting Makkot? Right? The interpretation of many of the Rishonim is that there's still going to be an Isur. There's still a prohibition. We understand that. But why should you get Makkot as well? For various reasons. One of them is, we know, the Ritz writes explicitly, that, I don't remember, I think the Rivan may write it as well, that a lav she'ein bo ma'aser, we've learned that you don't get Makkot for an action, for a lav does not involve an action. So the one who is shaving the hair is certainly performing an action. The one who is having his hair shaved by somebody else is not doing anything. There's no ma'aser, so why should they get Makkot? So that's the Gemara here asks. It says, "Echad HaMakif, Echad HaNikaf Loker, Amar le man da'achil tamle ba'al bila lake." So they asked him a very interesting choice of expression, and we have to see why precisely this is the example that's given. But this is an expression which the Gemara uses. So somebody who's eating dates from a basket, would they get Makkot? In other words, they don't appear to have done anything wrong. Maybe they haven't done anything wrong. Why should they get Makkot? Again, notice the Gemara here is not asking why the Nikav has done anything wrong. It's not asking why there shouldn't be an Isur. It's asking why there should be Makkot. So he says, and the Gemara is now going to give 3 answers. So just before, let's see. So the Rivan over here says, on the Achil Tamri Ba'arbila, says Achel Tmarim Bekvara. Person's eating dates from a basket. Kvara is really sort of a sieve. Yehei would they be get Makkot B'tmiya? Ask with B'tmiya, with wonderment, with amazement. Klomar Nikaf Ma Pesha Shu Lokeh. In other words, the one who is having the haircut, what have they done? Why should they get Makkot? Lav she'en bo ma'aseh v'lo lelki. It is a lav she'en bo ma'aseh. There is no action. Why should they get Makkot? So there was I think it was in the Ritva that I saw that I wanted to share with you. He says, yeah. Just put up on the screen again. Okay, so over here says the Ritva like this. He says, Yafeh Pirish Rabbeinu Meir the Af Rav Chisda Modeh She'anikaf Over Balav. In other words, Rav Chisda, who asked this question, he agrees that from the Rivan you might learn even not like this, because the Rivan said, he said, Ma Pesha Shulake, what's his crime? Meaning, what's he done wrong? Maybe he hasn't done anything wrong at all. But here we see that he is definitely over balav, right? That he has transgressed a prohibition. Uchdichtiv lo takifu ukudita betosefta. Tosefta is going to tell us from the fact that it says lo takifu, which is in the plural, not lo takif in the singular. So maybe that's to indicate that there is an avera on both of them. And he's not asking a question. The question is on the fact that the nikaf is also going to be lokeh, it's also going to get malkut. And that is why it uses this language for the one who's eating these dates. Okay, so we're going to get to that. That's going to be one of the answers in the Gemara. Okay, well, I just want to skip that because we'll see it in the Gemara soon. But what the point was, he said, he says, why does it use this expression of the one who's eating these dates? Lucky. Here's what it means to say. Even though he's getting benefit from this action, from the fact that he's eating, but he didn't perform a forbidden action, he didn't perform a forbidden ma'aseh, right? Why should he get malkut? Says Imken, mi shochel b'yom tov perot sheliket chavero be'oto yom yehei lokeh lefi sheneneh afagav d'lo avid ma'aseh. In other words, he understands why in the case of dates, you could say that the person is eating these dates from a basket which somebody else picked on Yom Tov. Okay, so that is forbidden. They did something which they weren't. There was a forbidden action that was done there previously, but his action was not did not involve an issur, and therefore that is going to be the question. So let's see what the Gemara now says. Either way,
Rabbi Kenigsberg.
Yeah.
Could I ask a general question? Is this discussion about Makkot just historical and theoretical, or are there circumstances in the future where it could be reinstated? And in fact, why isn't it applied today? I mean, what are the conditions for applying it?
Right. So many of the penalties which we have, we don't have today. We don't have a Sanhedrin that can come along and can administer these punishments. So not chayavei mitot, not malkot, not any of these things. That is the primary reason why. The truth is that even if we had a Sanhedrin, so we then, or in every case, we require hatra'ah, we require warning and understanding. It may be that at the time when these things were actionable, so the vast majority, if not all of the Jewish people, were following the halachot and understood what they were. In a generation where many people have grown up not following these things and not voluntarily, keeping the mitzvot. So it's questionable, even if there would be hatra'ah in such a situation where there would be sufficient. The person doesn't accept the authority of the Torah in the first place. Right? It's not about coercion in that sense. So the fact that we don't have a Sanhedrin, and the fact that people are not keeping it, and the fact that we don't have a Hatra'ah in that sense, so none of this is actionable nowadays. Would it be again in the future? We assume so. Once we have a Sanhedrin again, and many of these laws will be reinstated. But again, then we would hope and we would think that in such a scenario, the majority again of the Jewish people would voluntarily submit to this authority, and that's how it would work. Either way, the principles are foundational here in order for us to understand the severity of the action, in order to understand what the Torah is talking about. For example, we're going to see later on, coming up maybe in the next daf, we're going to get into Hilchot Yom Tov as well. We're going to see whether Yom Tov whether we say you have different Makkot for different melachot on Yom Tov, or there is just one Isser of Yom Tov. On Shabbat, we know that there are 39 different melachot. On Yom Tov, do we say that each melacha has its separate prohibition, and there are less than 39 melachot on Yom Tov, because you can cook and you can do other things as well? Or do we say that there's just one prohibition there? So it does help us to understand conceptually the conceptual underpinnings of these mitzvot as well. So, and the truth is, this sugya that we're looking at right now, this is very, very relevant in terms of a question of prohibition of lifnei iver. Right? There is a prohibition from the Torah of lifnei iver, not to cause somebody else to sin, not to provide the opportunity in a way that somebody else can sin. We've discussed it previously because it comes up many places. How is that related to this mitzvah and to other mitzvot as well? So again, the Gemara says that both of them are going to get Makkot. So, and then we ask, how can that be? So 3 answers which the Gemara is going to give. Answer number 1, it says, mani. I'll say, who is it? Who is saying the statement that, according to who is this idea that echad makif echad nikaf lokeh? Rabbi Yodai. So answer number 1 is, actually, you're right. There is no ma'aseh for the nikaf, and we would say lav she'ein bo ma'aseh, you don't get malkot. But Rabbi Yoda disagrees. Rabbi Yoda says that a lav she'ein bo ma'aseh you do get malkot for, and therefore this is going according to his opinion and not everybody else's. Right? We learned this earlier on, where we saw that by the mitzvah of by notar, that Rabbi Yehuda taught us that a lav she'ein bo ma'aseh one could still get malkut for. Okay, answer number 2 is Rava. Rava omer b'makif le'atzmo v'divrei hakol. Right, so rather than saying this is only according to one Tana, this is according to everybody, but there's only one individual involved. It's the makif le'atzmo. Right, so the person is shaving their own hair, so they are responsible as the shaver and the shavi, I suppose. Now the question would be, what does that mean? If it's makif la'atzmo, then when Rav Chisda said echad makif echad nikaf lokeh, does that mean he gets 2 sets of malkot? Right? Is it just one malkot for being the shaver and being the shavi, or is it just one set of malkut? What does that mean? In any event, he is certainly the one who is getting the malkut. And answer number 3, Rav Ashi omer b'mesayeya v'divrei hakol. Right, so both Rav and Rav Ashi don't want to say that this is only according to certain Tanaim. They both say this is according to everybody. Rava says that it's the makif le'atzmo, and that's why he gets malkut. Rav Ashi says no, it's b'mesayeya, where he is assisting. Okay, now mesayeh meaning somebody else is performing the prohibition, but I, by providing them with assistance and playing a significant part in that role, and therefore I would that mesayeh would be responsible for that action, and they would get malkut as well. So the Rivan says over here on the second of the wide lines, he says Messiah. What does it mean? To assist. He says Mazmina se'alot lemakif. He pulls out. Maybe he's like, he's wet the hairs and he's removed them, so to make it easier for the person to cut them off, whatever it is. So there's a lot of discussion around this point of Messiah, right? Because it seems to contradict a little bit from some other Gemarot that we have. And the Taz and the Shach and many of the poskim discuss it over here. The a lot of them ask a question based on the Gemara in Beitza. The Gemara in Beitza says that I'm just want to see where I had this open for you. Yeah, we'll see it in the Ritva. Yeah, so the Ritva says the following: it says B'Msayev Devrakol Pilesh Rashi Zal. Okay, as we know, that is not there's not Rashi, that is the Rivan, but he says Shemazmin lo haselot, right? That the Messiah is that he makes the hairs available, sort of to be cut, to be shaved. V'ikad kashaleh, and those who ask the question, Hadamrina b'Mesechet Yom Tov, right? Mesechet Beitza, which is also known as Mesechet Yom Tov by some of the Rishonim, le'inyan Michal Kuti l'Yisrael b'Yom Tov. V'Yisrael amitzu patach the Messiah ein bo mamash. Okay, so without getting into all the technicalities now, but there is a sugya over there about sort of coloring one's eyes. Not sure exactly what it is. It's something which was done for refuah, right? It's called michal. It was probably some sort of blue dye, whatever it was. Now there's an isur. There's a prohibition on Yom Tov of tzovea, of coloring in. So it says. So this idea of michal eine would seemingly be a prohibition of tzovea. The Gemara over there says that if a non-Jew was doing it for the Jew on Yom Tov, right? So there's a question. It says, what about the fact that he's opening and closing his eyes, which is assisting, which is messiah to the non-Jew who's doing it. So he says messiah, and the Gemara over there says messiah in bo mamash. I.e., the one who's doing it, the one who is Messiah is not really assisting. They're not part of the prohibition. So says the Ritva, and this is what many ask, many Rishonim, many Achronim. We'll see in a moment that it seems like a lot of the Achronim did not have access to the Ritva on this Gemara. I was listening to something yesterday. We spoke on Shabbat how the Torah is compared to the Midbar. Torah was given in the Midbar. By Midbar, we always read before Shavuot. And one of the reasons Chazal tell us, just like fire, water, and the Midbar are hefker lakol, just as they are available, just as they are free to everybody. So too, the Torah is free, right? And as it says in Perek Avot, it says we have keter Torah, the Torah is free and accessible to everybody. So I was listening to a shiur yesterday that pointed out, said we probably live in the first generation when that statement is actually true. Completely true. Meaning the Torah is free, is accessible to everybody, right? In the palm of your hand, literally, we have access for free to Kol Torah Kula. We have whatever sefer you want, whatever manuscript you want, anywhere, the amount of the Rishonim, the Achronim, we have access to these works, which the Rishonim themselves, which the Achronim did not have access to. The Shach and the Taz probably did not see the Ritva on Masechet Makkot. Yeah, we have it in front of us. It's amazing when you think about it, the opportunities that we have, the accessibility of literally Kol Torah Kula. So that obviously is very nice. It's also gives us a great responsibility. In any event, so he says over here, says the Ritva that so from our Gemara, the one opinion says that Messiah means that you get Makkot. The Gemara in Beitza seems to indicate that Messiah is nothing. It's ein bo mamash. So he says the Ritva, a very, very logical answer. He says, Lo kasha. He says, not every case of Messiah is the same. Right? Messiah means to assist. We have to look at Kol Mikra Legufo. Sometimes the Messiah is doing something which is very, very important and very significant, and therefore it's part of the act. And sometimes it's not. He says, the Messiah ta'atam ein bo mamash. Over there, in the Gemara Beitza, correct, ein bo mamash. Why? A person's eye is opening and closing all the time. Right? When we were kids, it was always, you look at somebody, you clap your hands in front of their eye and you say, yeah, I made you blink, or whatever it is, right? A person's eyes are always opening and closing. That's something. So the fact that the person is there opening and closing their eyes, they're not really adding anything. If a person has, let's say they have short hair, right, and it's on their head and it's very hard to reach, and they move it in such a way that the person's now going to be able to shave it off or to cut it off with the blade. So that would be more of a Messiah. So that is the answer of the Ritva. Essentially, he says Lo she'ein kol ha'Messiahin shavim. That is how he resolves the contradiction. Now, the Aruch LaNer over here is an Achron. He brings this discussion in the Shach and the Taz, and we see that they have suggest different answers. Right? He says over here, he said, Rav Asham Sayah, Hataz be'orach chaim, hikshad Rav Ashia Hadad. He asked this question. De'acha svira le de Messiah chayav. Rav Yah in our Gemara, it sounds like Messiah is chayav. Ub'Shabbat Perek Matzniah svira le Rav Ashi be'atzmo, the Messiah in bo mamash. The Gemara in Shabbat, Rav Ashi says this line of Messiah in bo mamash, and also they asked the question from Beitza, which says Messiah in bo mamash. So Tirez. So what is the answer that the Taz gives? He says, Yesh chiluk bein Messiah b'shat ma'aseh demutar ubein Messiah kodem ha'ma'aseh. So it's a little bit counterintuitive. Says the Taz, if the Messiah is at the time when the person is doing the Yisur anyway, so that is mutar, because he's doing it anyway. But if it's Messiah kodem ha'ma'aseh, that if you are to do it before, so for example, where he makes the hairs available before the person comes to cut them off, well, then you're doing something extra. And then that would be an isur. The Shach did not like that. The Shach b'nekudot hakesef sham hisig alav. He argues against him. Right, and he says over here the reason is to do with the fact that it just says lo takifu, which is the plural, and then means there's an extra lav both for the makif and the nikaf. And then point out the Aruch LaNer, he says in Eloya lifnei Ataz v'Ashachti v'Haritzvah. The Kol Divrei Nemru bo. Says they didn't see the Ritzvah, who already asked this question, already gave us a terutz to say that v'tirutz rishon nachalek ben Messiah leMessiah, to say the difference between that not all lo kol ha'Messiahim shavim. Okay, so there's more to talk about there. The big sugya in terms of Messiah and lifnei iver, and this comes up in many different contexts as well, but we'll add kan for now. So the one then just continues. Just do a couple more lines. It says, "Mashchit pa'atz kano," the one who destroys the corners of the beard. Right? And Rabbanan pa'atz kano, sof skano. Again, just like we said by the head, the corners of the beard means the end of the beard. Ezu sof skano, shibolet skano. Okay, it doesn't really tell us too much, but it means these the 5 corners of the beard. Again, we don't know exactly where they are. Different opinions in the Rishonim. 2 on the one side of the face, 2 on the other side of the face, another one at the bottom. Machloket Rishonim as well in terms of how far down it goes. And as I mentioned yesterday, this is one of the issues that people have in terms of the sugya of shaving. 2 days ago, there are those who, for this reason, do not shave their beard at all. There are others who don't do so for Kabbalistic reasons. Other people do shave. We use electric shavers, which is also connected to our sugya as well. But outcome for today. So wishing everybody a Shabbat Shalom and a Chag Sameach. First a Chag Sameach, then a Shabbat Shalom, and we will continue next week.
Thank you. Chag Sameach.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Chag Sameach.
Very good. Shabbat Shalom.